Hey, hi, hello. Welcome to Diana Emerson. Today we're listening to Cold Case Files, and this is Sisters in Death.
When my grandmother passed away, I inherited a metal box. It contains original newspaper articles, Wileen and Lily's death certificates. It was her collection of any kind of investigative material. This crime was extremely horrific. It just doesn't even seem like another human being would be capable of this. My family was ripped apart. On her deathbed, my grandmother told me never to forget what happened, to keep fighting for the family and getting justice for my two aunts, Wileen and Lily.
It's morning in the Heights, a neighborhood known for its artists and musicians.
Back in the 80s, the Heights was known for an area that had a lot of shops, restaurants, live music. It really brought in artists, musicians. The Heights was a very vibrant scene.
It was an art environment. Most of the people that lived in the Heights, and that's what they did for their career and what they loved to do.
The Heights is right where sisters Lily, 23, and Wileen Kennedy, 33, want to be.
Wileen was a stained glass artist and interested in arts and music, so it was a perfect place for her to move. She could walk to a club and listen to live music.
Wileen and Lily's father, Jack Kennedy, also lives nearby in the Heights. This morning, he's waiting for them to take him to a doctor's appointment. But they're late.
My grandfather decided to go ahead and just walk over to the house, which was right around the corner. Something did not appear right because the front door was open. Wileen was laying on the ground at the entryway, and Lily was laying at Wileen's feet. He found both of his daughters dead.
He called 911, asking for medical assistance. Each victim had different injuries. Lily, the younger one, appeared to have a single gunshot wound to the head. There was not much blood on the carpet underneath her. There were no wounds on her hands or her feet. I immediately presumed that she was shot first. Wileen had much more obvious, much more severe injuries. She had a gag in her mouth. Her undergarments were pulled down. There was more blood under Wileen's body. She had knife wounds on her throat. There was a wound on her arm that appeared to be a gunshot. For a father like Jack to walk in and find his children, that's beyond imagination.
My uncle was shaking uncontrollably and crying uncontrollably. Oh, I don't know how he even stood up seeing that scene.
I imagined how I might have felt if I found my daughter. no question, I was affected. I've never had anything to match this.
Right away, investigators can tell the killer targeted Wileen.
Whoever had taken her life had spent some significant time harming Wileen. She was abused, if not tortured, prior to her death.
This crime is extremely horrific. You could tell that this was personal. Whoever did this was definitely concentrated on harming Wileen while her dead sister laid next to her.
I feel like Wileen was the target, and that Lily was just used as another way to torture Wileen by killing her first.
While detectives search for a motive, 11-year-old Jackie and the rest of Wileen and Lily's family confront this horrible loss.
I used to spend the night at that house. My mom was crying because she knew I could have been there. Wileen and Lily are my aunts. Wileen loved dancing and was very social. She had a vintage clothing store in the Heights area.
The vintage clothing store was Wileen's passion. That was her goal, to find the most unique pieces of clothing she could.
I loved going to visit my Aunt Wileen and spending the weekend with her. I remember her taking me clothing shopping because we would go to unusual places. So some of the clothes I would wear to school, no one else had them. Wileen was always very energetic, outgoing. She accepted absolutely everybody. She was a great person to look up to.
Lily was a little more subdued, more calm, and very, I don't know what you'd say, within herself.
Lily was more like your girl next door, quieter, soft-spoken, but very goofy. She's the type that would go and play pool with the boys at the bar. My first footsteps were from my grandmother to Lily. She was a big sister to me. Then all of a sudden, my aunts aren't there. They're just taken away from me.
It was unbelievable. It was probably the most horrific day of my whole life.
It was like a horror movie for Wileen, being tortured the last hour of her life.
A CSI team goes over every inch of the crime scene, and they start to get a picture of what happened the morning of this double murder.
There's no sign of forced entry. It seems to speak to the idea that they knew the person and were comfortable enough to let him in, and then things escalated out of control from that point. There were bloody footprints throughout the house. The footprints that we saw had a distinctive wavy kind of design to them, sort of like an athletic shoe. We found that wavy pattern around the corner and just a little bit down the street from the house.
What was interesting was that one of the couch cushions was missing from Wileen's couch. I'm not sure why the couch cushion was taken.
There's been a couple of rumors. Wileen is said to have told an associate that she had hidden some cocaine from her boyfriend in a cushion on the couch. But there was no evidence whatsoever of any kind of dope, anything of that nature.
She was a very neat, tidy person, but the house was ransacked and things were missing.
That would indicate somebody's looking for something, but there was $500 cash, and there was jewelry left in the house. But the amount of energy expended on Wileen led me to believe that somebody that wanted something from her, or she had really, really made somebody mad. The murder of two sisters, a very vicious attack, really horrific, torturous behavior that ups the game. We're going to have to find this guy. This was beyond the pale.
Police canvassed the heights, looking for anyone who'd seen or heard anything unusual the night of the murders.
A neighbor reported that around 11 p.m., Lily knocked on her door and asked for ace bandage. Lily explains she had just sprained her ankle. Everything seemed fine.
Another neighbor, she heard some loud noise and some shouting and whatnot, and then what she thought were very loud thumps. That might well have been the two gunshots, since there were two shots fired in the house. That was about 6 to 6:30 that morning.
The third witness gives police part of a timeline and what could be a description of the killer.
At 6:30 or so, he had gone out to get in his truck to get ready to go to work. He sees a guy come around the corner, and he's carrying a multicolored blanket and some clothing inside, and he's stumbling around and dropping stuff. What are you doing here? Why, do I look like a burglar? Yes, you do. Well, I'm really embarrassed. My girlfriend and I just had a big argument. She threw me out. And this is the stuff I've got, and I'm just heading on out. That was the extent of that exchange. The person that was seen by the witness was rather clumsy, and he dropped a cushion from a love seat. I had documented a cushion missing from a full love seat from the house, and lo and behold, it's discovered around the corner. We found it. It had blood on it. It was torn open, but there was nothing in it.
The telltale cushion confirms that the suspect had at least been in Wylene's house, and investigators now have a witness.
That witness helped prepare a composite sketch, which sometimes opens dozens of potential leads.
The first time I saw the composite drawing was in a local Houston newspaper. It's a face out there, but it could be anybody. It just looked like a man to me. I mean, there was no one, it was nobody I recognized.
Most people like to think of, oh, this is going to take me to the person. And it wasn't, those aren't photographs. The fact that we didn't get an exact match early on was, to me, quite the norm.
While police continue their neighborhood canvass, the medical examiner conducts autopsies on the victims.
In terms of the autopsy results, we learned that Lily had been shot in the back of the head and that the bullet had not exited her head. That was the cause of death. Wylene's injuries, there were multiple knife strokes. I think there were 4 cuts to her neck, gaping wounds in her neck. That was ruled the cause of death.
At autopsy, sexual assault kits were collected by the medical examiner in both Wylene and Lily's examination. The testing was performed in our lab. Results for Lily was negative, so there was no seminal fluid identified. The sexual assault kit that was collected from Wylene, the results for semen tested positive. 1984 types of testing that could be performed was very limited. There was really no DNA testing as we know today.
The autopsy leads them nowhere. So investigators turn to Lily and Wylene's father, Jack, to see if he knows anyone who had a grudge against his daughters.
Jack had some reservations immediately about Wylene's former boyfriend, and Jack didn't shy away from having some thoughts not positive about Lily's ex-husband.
Unfortunately, Wylene and Lily both, I guess you would say, weren't good at picking men.
Jack said that Lily's ex-husband had recently made threats. Wylene's ex-boyfriend was involved in some drug use. Right off the bat, we had two very viable suspects, an ex-boyfriend and an ex-husband. There's every likelihood it's one of them.
After the murders happened, it became clear that Wylene's boyfriend had been involved in drug dealing. My family was convinced it was him.
At the time of this tragedy, they were not together. They were considered broken up, but they were still in contact.
As a child, I knew Wylene's boyfriend as an uncle. He, to me, was a part of my family. I have a lot of great memories spending time with him. He was outgoing, made a lot of people laugh. So it was very hurtful for me to think that he had harmed my aunt.
We interviewed Wylene's ex-boyfriend, and as might be expected, we got our hopes up. He apparently had a free-flowing lifestyle, and there were a number of conversations about his involvement in the sale of drugs. He didn't ask for counsel. We put him in a lineup. The neighbor, our witness in the lineup situation, was very, very helpful, but he did not in any way fit the person that our witness had seen leaving the house.
And the ex-boyfriend does agree to take a polygraph test. And he passes with flying colors, no problem.
With Wylene's ex-boyfriend in the clear, police turn their attention to Lily's ex-husband.
My Aunt Lily was staying with Wylene to escape her husband. Lily had just divorced on the Friday before. By Monday morning, she's gone at 23 years old.
Information came from the family members that he had made threats to harm her. Certainly, the overwhelming number of victims know their assailants in the first place, but now we've got an ex-husband. We interviewed him in Pasadena, which is a suburb city. We found that he was big and strong and strapping and not anything resembling the drawing. Also, he was on crutches. We found that he had had surgery and had to have discs removed.
They confirmed the hospital. There was no way that he would have been physically capable of committing this crime.
I will say that did take the wind out of our sails because here's a good viable lead, but now it's gone.
And it also Makes no sense that he would have spent time on Wileen if it was Lily that he had the issue with.
With the X's cleared, detectives widened their scope and looked into Wileen's friends and associates.
She was just a young, beautiful woman wanting to have fun in many ways and experimenting in many ways.
Being in the partying atmosphere, you are exposed to being around all sorts of people.
Some of the people in the vintage clothing business were really, really into some cocaine dealing. Not to imply that she was a part of that, but had some associates that gave us pause. We spent some time pursuing leads that Wiley's ex-boyfriend had been involved with stealing some drugs from some people. We spent a lot of time searching for people that might have been seeking revenge on him through the girls. It was a lot of dead ends.
For 2 weeks, the case stalls. But then a tipster calls Crime Stoppers and claims he's seen shoe treads similar to those reported in Wileen's house.
We were alerted to the fact that there was a small apartment around the corner down an alley that someone noticed similar style footprints.
The footprints were very suspicious around the drug dealer's house that lived close by.
And I went down and went to that location, and we saw wavy footprints in front of the door. We had a good positive blip on the radar and a good vibe. The occupant did not speak English. I speak Spanish, so I was able to converse with him. He granted us entrance to his house, and immediately we found 24 marijuana cigarettes, and we found LSD in the freezer, and found a big pistol that he had wrapped up. It turned out he was unlawfully in this country. We took him into custody, and we immediately submitted the shoes to the crime lab. This offered hope and promise, but his shoes did not match the pattern from the house. The gun was tested. It was obvious that it had not fired the bullets. Our joy was short-lived. He was not our guy. We were back to square one. We were striking out. It's definitely disappointing.
It made me realize that maybe we will never find out what happened to Wileen and Lily.
The thoughts never leave your mind. How can this person get by with murdering 2 young women, and then there's no word, no evidence, nobody says anything? The murderer is never going to be found.
At such a young age in 5th grade, all I could think about, if that happened to my aunts, anybody could break into the house and kill me. I had difficulty sleeping, walking around the house, locking doors, locking windows.
Police search for the killer, but the victim's family is mired in a state of grief and despair.
Every adult around me was completely falling apart. I felt like I had to, even though I was so young, I had to be strong. My grandfather, as a father, finding his daughters like that, he had PTSD, he had nightmares.
Uncle Jack blamed himself for not being there. The father is supposed to protect their children.
My mom went down a very bad path. She didn't know how to live after this.
The leads dwindle. Months pass, and there's nothing new. After 2 years, the case of the murdered sisters goes as cold as the darkness before dawn.
We found that within the second year mark that the case had really slowed down, and then it truly stopped.
I can tell you from someone who's worked with homicide survivors now for almost just about 30 years, to have a case like that go cold, it's got to gnaw at you.
It scares you because you think the same thing is going to happen to you or to your child. Like my only daughter. Could somebody come back and do that to her? It's so hard to think that a murderer got away.
The case might be cold, but Wileen and Lily's mother, Rose, refuses to let her daughters be forgotten.
Over time, my grandmother, Rose, made it her life to make sure that her daughter's stories were never forgotten.
On the anniversaries of the killing, she would go to the grave sites. There were some times that I would even go to the grave sites with her. She would make sure that she contacted newspapers, TV shows, so that it would not be forgotten.
Jackie Elliott carries on her grandmother's fight to find justice for Wileen and Lily. But decades pass without a decent lead.
So what's in the box?
When my grandmother passed away, most people inherit a jewelry box. I inherited a metal box. It contains original newspaper articles. It has a newspaper clipping of the composite drawing. It was her collection of any kind of investigative material. On her deathbed, my grandmother told me never to forget and try to make sure I continue the effort of getting the story out there.
Jackie spent her life looking for ways that the case would get known and that the murderer could be found.
On the 30th year anniversary, I decided to pick up the phone and call it Houston Police Department. I was nervous. They connected me to the cold case detective. I was able to find out some great news.
There was a cold case unit in the Houston Police Department. When the cold case detective assumed this case, he checked and they found that there was still a viable sample of fluids that had been gathered by the medical examiner at the autopsy.
They hadn't actually developed a DNA profile on it. It turns out we had something substantial, physical evidence to connect someone to the crime.
In a case like this, where we've run out of leads, but suddenly we discover that we have viable physical evidence, which the courts love and juries love, especially DNA, that's great news. they added that DNA to a national database. Unfortunately, we've never got any matches.
Okay, we have someone's DNA, but we still don't know who it belongs to. But hopefully they will be incarcerated at one point, and then bam, we have a match. I mean, that's all you can hope for.
Then the case that was cold for 30 years heats up with a single phone call.
I got a phone call early morning, maybe 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning, from someone who was in jail in our community, Lake County, Indiana. This person whom I had met before had important matters to discuss about a cold case in Houston, Texas.
A defendant who had earned a very, very long sentence said, I've got something to barter with for my freedom.
He mentioned the Kennedy sisters, but he right away mentioned who had committed these murders. The name of the murderer was Edmund Deegan. That morning, I called Houston Police Department.
The cold case investigator at the time actually went several states away and visited.
The informant says Edmund Deegan came to him back in 1984 in Houston, asking for help.
So my client and Edmund Deegan were associates. Deegan came over and with the duffel bag with stuff in there. Deegan told my client that he had just killed 2 people and that he needed to get rid of this evidence. He asked my client for a sledgehammer because he also had a gun and a knife, which he broke into pieces. He had a purse and some personal belongings that belonged to the Kennedy sisters. They went in the back and he started a fire and he threw the items in there.
The cold case investigator began checking that information out. It turned out Deegan was associated to varying degrees of activity with Wileen in the vintage clothing business. He was actually a competitor of hers.
My uncle, the brother of Wileen and Lily, immediately recognized the name Edmund Deegan, being one of Wileen's business associates, and had met Edmund Deegan. So it was a little startling that it was someone that Wileen actually knew.
Houston police tracked down Deegan and questioned him.
Tuesday, 11:57 a.m. Attempt to interview Edmund Deegan.
Go there. Oh, no time. That's me talking about it again.
Were you there that night? That it happened? Okay.
No, God, no.
Would you consider yourself a boyfriend with her?
No.
So you never had sex with her at all, ever? Is there any way you could, at some point, just come on by and just look at some more pictures and stuff like that?
Whatever you need. Appreciate you coming down. Is that a problem? And I'll be honest with you, somebody's naming you. Well, it's not me. 30 years later. Right. And they got it. Okay. Well, it's not me. No, you're not. Huh? It's not me, officer. On the up. But I did not kill anybody. Honestly. What I believe is that you did go over there. And you did get involved this whole time. Well, I promise you, I did not kill anyone. I don't care what anybody says. I was not involved in that murder of that girl. It's not true, officer. I mean, I'm serious. You willing to give me a swab? Like a buck swab? Sure, I guess so. I mean, I don't have any choice, do I? Well, this better be just go along with it. Yeah, I'm going along with it. Arguing with it. Yeah.
To deny taking a swab would mean that all the other answers were false. So Deegan had no choice.
This brother, inside of both cheeks together, just leave them together and rub them.
And the detective got what he needed.
And that's good. So,
For the first time, Jackie Elliott may be able to put a name to the sketch from 30 years ago.
I believe that the composite drawing from the neighbor was Deegan. If you compare a picture of Deegan at that time of his life to the composite drawing, you will see how similar both look to each other.
A few weeks later, Deegan's DNA swab results are back from the lab.
It took about 2 weeks for us to process the buccal swab, do the comparison. We have a very rigorous and thorough review process. On December 26th of 2014, we issued a DNA report. The conclusion was Edmund Deegan cannot be excluded. The most conservative statistic is you'd need to sample or test 1.4 billion people in order to potentially see that DNA profile again.
When we do get that hit, it is elation. It is, oh my goodness, we got you. Never give up.
It's very sad that my grandmother, my grandfather, and my mother did not live long enough to see the arrest.
Now we have a chance to go to trial. You've done your part, and now you have to sit back and wait and see what will happen with Deegan. It's out of your hands.
Edmund Deegan was arrested for the murders of Wileen and Lily, but the prosecutor was very clear to me that this case was going to be hard. Just because someone raped someone doesn't automatically mean they have murdered them. Unfortunately, other than the DNA, there's no other tangible evidence.
Because prosecutors don't have a strong hand to play, they're forced to make a devil's bargain with a killer.
The prosecutor was not able to connect Edmund Deegan physically to Lily's death, whereas Wileen had the DNA evidence on her body from that rape kit.
Sometimes prosecutors have to enter into negotiations because of the evidence, not because they want to.
Prosecutors make their deal, and it leaves a bitter taste with the victim's family.
The plea bargain was only pleading guilt to the murder of Wileen Kennedy. It dropped the rape charges, and it did not list Lily Kennedy. My Aunt Lily is the unnamed victim in all of this.
I get it. You needed to plead it out. Over 90% of these cases, they're going to end up with a plea bargain. I get it. But I was kind of thrown aback by the amount of sentence that he received.
It's very difficult, a 15-year sentence.
$15 is not enough. My cousins were young and didn't get to live their life, and he had all this time.
For Edmund Deegan, that was the deal of a lifetime.
Was I happy with that? No. A human's life, to steal one and deprive one is worth more than that. And it wouldn't hurt to know precisely what happened that morning. I believe that he went to find cocaine, according to the story, that she had some hidden from her ex-boyfriend. and things did not proceed the way he anticipated, but he did have a weapon with him. He had 2 weapons with him. And when things went south, he ended up using those weapons.
The news has Jackie and her family reeling. And there is one final injustice ahead.
The murderer, Deegan's back on the streets. He's out whether I like it or anyone likes it. A Texas law let him out after serving less than 7 years of a 15-year sentence. I had such a difficult time, but Andy has been a major support to me. He was the one that helped me learn and understand the law and why all these things were happening.
This quirky law that Texas enacted in 1977 to alleviate prison overcrowding. It's called the Mandatory Release Law. Basically stated any inmate, it didn't matter if you murdered somebody, if you raped somebody, even if you were a serial killer who committed a crime in Texas between 1977 and 1987 was eligible for automatic release as long as they maintained good behavior in prison. I guess they never thought that the after effects will haunt this state forever.
6 years? Really? For such a violent, disgusting act. The only place he belongs is behind bars or in a grave. I've been told he's not allowed to be in Harris County here in Houston for the next 10 years. You're asking for a criminal to follow rules when they've broken so many already. Honestly, the only way I'm ever going to feel safe in this world is going to be either me dying or him dying.
I miss them, and I want to hold them, and I want them back. I want to see their smiling faces.
I love them, Wileen and Lily. Even though they're not physically here with me to help me through this, they're still around me. They're like my angels.
Everyone called Tiffany my shadow. Wherever Mama went, Tiffany was with me. It was very hard to deal with her getting murdered. The police had no idea who to look for. Tiffany's was just another cold case. Whenever I got so disheartened, I go, maybe I should give up. But then my Indian blood comes out, and I go out and I talk to nature, and I talk to Tiffany, and the redbirds come into the yard, which is a good symbol. That means your loved one is close by. And I said, I will not give up. I will find who did this to you.
It's nearly midnight, and Sergeant John Reed is on his way to a call in Bethany, Oklahoma, a suburb of Oklahoma City. While driving, he spots something odd at the Sunshine Car Wash.
A white Dodge Neon was parked in the far west stall, but no one was around it. I didn't pay much more attention. After finishing the call, I drove by the Sunshine Car Wash again. And that same white Dodge Neon was still in the far west stall.
Now the Dodge Neon is the only vehicle left at the car wash.
I sent the license plate number to headquarters.
The car is registered to 19-year-old Tiffany Johnston. Reed finds Tiffany's keys and purse in the car. In the glove box, he discovers the phone number for Tiffany's mother, Kathy, who lives 60 miles away in Anadarko, Oklahoma.
I received a call from the Bethany Police Department wanting to know if Tiffany was with me. I told them no, she was supposed to meet her new husband, Brian. They were going to go to their little club type disco place that they always go to at 11 o'clock at night, because that was when Ryan got off work. You get woke up in the middle of the night wanting to know if your daughter's there, but you know something's not right. Back then we had pagers. We didn't have cell phones, so I was burning up her pager trying to get her to answer. But her pager was in her car. So we knew something was wrong because Tiffany always took her pager with her. But we didn't want to believe the worst.
Tiffany didn't know a stranger. She was always talkative, bubbly, outgoing, and she was quite feisty. She was opinionated. She didn't back down or give in to the crowd.
Tiffany said what she thought, which came from her mama. We liked the same things. I mean, I was Tiffany's best friend.
The two of us together liked to cause trouble and stay up later than we should. As we got a little older, we would go to some of the little country dance places.
She had met Ryan at a little disco type place, and it was divided between over 21 and under 21.
Brian is somebody that I went to school with. We both went to Moore High School. We had the same social circle of friends. He was kind of quiet, somewhat reserved. But Tiffany and Ryan instantly got along great. They clicked with each other, and from then out, they were inseparable.
And about a year after graduation, she goes, "Mom, I'm going to get married." I go, "Oh, you are?" "Yeah."
They had wine that my grandpa had made, and that was something I thought was really special. And I remember that it rained, but it didn't ruin the wedding. It was special because my grandma used to say that the rain would wash the bad stuff away.
After Tiffany and Ryan got married, Tiffany was working as a waitress at a Mexican restaurant, and she also had a part-time job as a salesperson in an electronics place. And Tiffany would drive from one side of Oklahoma City to the other side to go to her second job because she wanted to go to college. She wanted to work with plants and do flower arrangements.
Ryan and Tiffany were both hard workers. Ryan worked in a manufacturing plant. And unfortunately, sometimes their job hours meant they didn't get to spend a lot of time together as newlyweds. But whenever they did, they made the best of it.
And so she was supposed to meet Ryan at the pub that night, except Ryan made it and Tiffany didn't show up on their 3-month anniversary.
Tiffany's mother and family meet at Tiffany and Ryan's apartment and form a search party. They set out for the area near the car wash.
There was nobody on the streets. It was kind of dead because Bethany was a very small community. They had maybe 4 police officers.
There's no sign of Tiffany anywhere, but with one call to Oklahoma State Police, everything changes.
Around I-40 and Gregory Road, locals noticed a spot in the grass, and that drew their attention to it. They stopped and found a body of a white female. Once the crime scene agents get there from Oklahoma City, they process the scene. The white female was laying face down. The only thing that she had on was the top of a swimming suit. It was a homicide possibly caused by strangulation because she had marks on her neck. And that's when Bethany PD requested OSBI to assist with the investigation.
The OSBI came to say that a body had been found, but it was not positive if it was Tiffany or not. The atmosphere was very tense. There was a lot of things not being spoken that everybody was fearful of. They pulled Ryan aside and spoke to him. That's when we knew that it was even more not right.
Agents took a picture of the body, showed it to Ryan, and Ryan identified Tiffany.
I had a lot of anger. I was mad at God. I was mad at whoever did this, even though we didn't know who or how many were involved. There was a lot of sadness and disbelief. Everybody was trying to process the grief, and Kathy is the person that was really on the police constantly with wanting answers, wanting information. She led that charge.
I thought, why Tiff? She didn't do anything to anyone. You can't imagine who would want to murder her. But we were bound and determined to find who did this to Tiffany.
That car wash is fairly busy. If somebody would have tried to have abducted Tiffany, there would have been one hell of a fight. But the scene where her car was at didn't show that. The car was unlocked. Nothing around that scene was disturbed that led you to believe that there was any altercation there. So the struggle that took place didn't take place there. It took place at another stall where she knew the person and just got in the car with him and talked to him. It's a case where anyone could be the suspect.
After Tiffany's murder, I had a lot of social anxiety to where I would get easily panicked inside a grocery store. If somebody got in line behind me, I would panic and walk out of the store, leaving my stuff there. I had shut down a lot due to my fear of the unknown.
During the autopsy, the medical examiner determined that the manner of death was a homicide caused by strangulation.
The medical examiner collects swabs for forensic testing, but the results are inconclusive.
Without any physical evidence to assist you, you go back to those who often are considered the principal individuals in a homicide. So in this case, we had a dead wife. Now we have a living husband, and oftentimes the husband is responsible for the death of the wife.
The medical examiner wasn't able to determine the exact time of death. The last time she was seen alive there at the car wash was shortly after 6 o'clock. And several co-workers saw Ryan Johnston work. He had a solid alibi that he was at work from 3 to 11.
Investigators focus on the car wash.
The witness who had actually seen Tiffany washing her car around 6 p.m. He noticed 3 people who were observing her.
The witness observed Tiffany walk from the stall she was at to the coin machine, which is kind of in the middle of the car wash. He said as she was walking, the 3 subjects were kind of watching her very close.
The witness believes the 3 people at the car wash might have been involved in Tiffany's murder.
We put out several press releases through the Crime Stoppers and through our tip line, and we had received hundreds of tips of potential people who may fit the description of the people who were seen at the car wash.
Police tracked down this suspicious trio and questioned them about the murder.
Alibis were looked at. Investigators even went one step further and polygraphed, but the polygraphs were all successful. They were at the car wash but had nothing to do with Tiffany's disappearance.
While police search for Tiffany's killer, the community rallies around her family.
Tiffany's death affected a lot of people, and the town of Anadarko is a very community-minded town. My house was flocked with people because everyone come to show their support. I was lost. A parent's not supposed to bury their child. The children are supposed to bury their parents. I wasn't thinking a whole bunch because I just needed to get Tiffany's clothes taken care of. We had to have something long sleeved and high neck because of the strangulation around her neck. But one of my friends, Patsy Miley, helped me. She did Tiffany's clothes for her funeral.
Tiffany's funeral was hard. It took place in the same church that 3 months earlier her and Ryan got married in. I would say that's the first time I actually just broke down and cried, was there in my grandma's arms. Probably at least 400 people can be held in that church. I believe there was standing room only by the time the funeral actually started. And I remember scanning the crowd constantly, wondering who is that person and who is this person. It was almost like everybody was a suspect to me if I didn't know who they were.
The police had no idea who to look for, so we decided we would do our own investigating. One of my friends set up a video at the funeral in case someone looked suspicious.
Watching the funeral on video is painful, but Kathy and her family study every second of it, searching for anyone that looks out of place.
But we didn't come up with anything on that at all.
5 months pass with no solid leads. But then, finally, investigators get a break.
the owner of the car wash called headquarters with a tip. He had seen news reports of a gentleman that was arrested on an abduction in Texas. He recognized that individual as a customer of his car wash. William Reese at one time resided in the Anadarko, Oklahoma area. He was convicted of 2 sexual crimes committed here in Cleveland County, and he was released in 1996.
When William Reese left prison, he worked as a farrier shoeing horses. He did this in the Oklahoma City area all the way down to his home in Texas.
2 months prior to Tiffany's murder in 1997, he was involved in the abduction of Sandra Sapal.
Sandra Sapal was 19 years old and she was pregnant. She was parked at a Waffle House and noticed that her tires had been slashed. And Reese, pretending to be a good Samaritan, hopped up and said, "Hey, I can help you with that. Do you need a ride?" And at knife point, put her into his truck and kidnapped her. They're driving down the interstate, I-45 in Houston. She noticed the back door is unlocked and she's able to kick out the back door, jump out of the moving vehicle on the interstate, roll away, and escape.
Sandra was kidnapped in Texas 2 months before Tiffany's murder. She wasn't able to ID Reese as her abductor until 3 months after Tiffany was killed.
With the help of a hypnotist at a law enforcement agency, she was able to recall specific details about Reese, about his truck, that were strong enough to pin this crime on Reese.
The owner of the car wash said he had seen Reese at the car wash several times, had tried to start conversation with him, and that Reese typically drove a white dually pickup truck. Agents discovered that Reese had used a payphone in the town of Yukon, which is a little bit further west of Bethany.
This is in the days before cell phones, and the calling card was the way that people communicated via long distance at payphones. We requested those calling card records of William Reese, and there were 2 phone calls that were of particular interest. One was on the day of, just an hour before Tiffany was abducted, and that was made from the La Quinta Inn at I-40 and Mustang Road. That location is probably 4 or 5 miles away from the scene of the abduction at the Sunshine Car Wash.
Investigators believe Reese is the killer, but their case is weak.
We have William Reese in the area now, but we don't have him at the car wash at the time of Tiffany's disappearance. There was just no physical evidence. There was no eyewitness. There was nothing to corroborate that he was at the Sunshine Car Wash at that particular time.
With no solid evidence against Reese, the investigation stalls.
The agents eventually reached a point in time that they ran every lead that they had and still didn't have enough to establish probable cause of who committed the crime. There wasn't anything left to follow up on.
So the case of the newlywed who never showed up goes as cold as an Oklahoma prairie on a moonless winter night.
I called the Bethany PD and harassed them, but they really had run out of leads and they didn't know what to do. So Tiffany's case was thrown back in cold case files. And in the meantime, I go back to work again to help cover the cost of Tiffany's funeral.
While the case goes cold for law enforcement, It's still red hot for Kathy.
I was really angry and bitter. Whoever had killed my baby, I really hated them. And I think that was what got me through most of it, was the anger and the bitterness.
I had come to accept that it wouldn't be solved. Kathy's the one that led that fight. She wasn't going to give up on this.
Every year after Tiffany passed away, I would call our news person and say, hey, the police aren't doing their job. Can we do a remembrance of Tiffany? They would say, people get tired of hearing this. And I said, I don't care. There's got to be someone out there that knows something about Tiffany's case. On every anniversary, little trinkets started showing up on Tiffany's headstone. Rings, necklaces, little homemade doily things, flowers. And I was on the phone calling everyone that I knew would go out. And no one knew who was putting this stuff on Tiffany's grave on those days. But I'm glad that someone didn't forget Tiffany's case.
For 15 years, Tiffany's mother never gives up. And she won't let detectives give up either.
I was a very persistent mother that wanted justice for my child. I started calling representatives that was supposed to represent our districts. Hey, I want Tiffany's case open. What can you do about getting it open?
Kathy Dobry really never gave up this entire time and kept asking law enforcement to take another look. Because of her, law enforcement started re-examining Tiffany Johnston's case as a cold case.
The constant pressure from Tiffany's determined mother gets results. Oklahoma State Police reopened this cold case.
One of the challenging things from the very beginning is that there was nothing of evidentiary value to help link anyone to the crime. So one of the first things I did was pulled out every box of evidence, and I noticed a buccal swab. We really didn't think we had any DNA evidence at the time because it had been tested earlier and there was no DNA profile. So I sat down with our criminalist at the OSBI lab and asked, with modern technology, what can we do with it? And that's when the criminalist says, I think we can retest it and it's worth a shot. I received a laboratory report from the criminalist. A couple of the swabs that were taken by the medical examiner contained a partial male DNA profile.
Swabs taken during the autopsy, finally, after 16 years, give detectives a partial DNA profile of the killer. The swabs also show that Tiffany was sexually assaulted.
The challenge with cold cases is that over time, the DNA evidence has broken down or degraded. So based on the portion of the swab remaining, we were able to obtain a partial DNA profile. And that was not enough information to enter that profile into the DNA database known as CODIS, the Combined DNA Index System.
The 16-year-old DNA profile is only half of the equation. Investigators need a suspect.
And that's when I really hot and heavily went and chased down just about everybody in that report again to interview. I didn't know, but I've got a DNA profile now. We went back and re-identified, located, and obtained buccal swabs from people who Tiffany worked with many of the ex-boyfriends, acquaintances, even people who were at the car wash at the time that she was there. We went as far as Ryan Johnston himself. Even though he had a solid alibi and he cleared the polygraph, we still took a buccal swab from him to compare.
That all of the male DNA profiles that were submitted from the people of interest at the crime scene and the husband, they were all excluded from the partial profile of the rectal swab.
Detectives have eliminated all the suspects from the original investigation, except one.
We had multitude of people who could be considered persons of interest, but William Reese, who the car wash owner identified and who was a very strong person of interest in the case, was the only person that hadn't been eliminated. While I was evaluating who William Reese was and the past criminal activities he was involved in, I discovered that he's a person of interest in other abductions in the Texas area.
In addition to the attempted abduction of Sandra Sapal in May 1997, Reese was a suspect in a string of missing person cases that occurred within weeks of Tiffany Johnston's murder.
On August 17, 1997, Jessica Kane, a 17-year-old high school student, went missing.
She loved theater, she loved performing, and in fact, she had just left a cast party with her theater friends at a restaurant.
But after the party, she was last seen traveling south from that restaurant and had not been seen since. On July 15, 1997, Kelly Cox, a criminal justice major there in the Denton area, just completed a tour of the Denton Dispatch Center. When she left, she realized she locked the keys in her car and went to a payphone to call a boyfriend for assistance. And she was never seen after that point.
Kelly Cox was 20 years old. She was a student at University of North Texas. She was also a young mother. There were suspicions that Reese was involved, but no hard evidence to link him to either case. In looking at the pattern of women that went missing, this predator is able to get them away from their friends or whoever they may have been with. They're all vulnerable, alone, and young.
The quest to solve Tiffany Johnston's cold case might have led investigators to a serial killer.
After the male DNA profile was generated, we had eliminated all the other people that had been potential persons of interest. We reached out to the Texas Rangers to obtain a buccal swab. And if I'm a betting man, I bet William Reese is going to be the contributor of it.
State investigators compare Reese's DNA to what was found at the crime scene. It's a partial match.
William Reese and all of his paternal male relatives could not be excluded from the partial profile of the rectal swab, which means that William Reese or any one of his male relatives could have contributed to that profile.
At first, it kind of disappointed me in that I was really wanting to slam dunk the exact match on the DNA.
Even though it's not a perfect match, it is progress. Investigators need time to build their case against Reese. And for once, time is on their side. Reese is locked away, serving a 60-year sentence in Texas for kidnapping Sandra Sapal.
We were fairly confident that William Reese was the killer, but we needed to get the confession from him. The Texas Rangers went to the institution that William Reese was confined in to the aggravated kidnapping of Sandra Sapal, to interview him on several cases in the Texas area and also the Tiffany Johnston homicide. Doing that interrogation, the Texas Rangers informed William Reese that Oklahoma has DNA that links him to Tiffany Johnston, and that potentially there could be a death penalty case that comes out of that.
The Texas Rangers tell Reese they won't ask for the death penalty if he cooperates in their open cases.
William Reese reaches a point that he confessed to those other missing person cases in Texas. And when they talked about Tiffany Johnston's homicide, William Reese admits that he was at the car wash and that he abducted and killed Tiffany.
If only to spare his life, Reese gives investigators his version of what happened that night, nearly 20 years earlier.
William Reese said that he and Tiffany had an altercation. He had put her inside the horse trailer that was behind his white dually pickup, and inside the horse trailer ended up raping her, and she ended up being killed there.
Reese blamed Tiffany for being rude to him. He said he had sprayed her with water at some point from the car wash, and she yelled at him, and then they quote unquote got into it.
But the scene where her car at didn't show that. Nothing around that scene was disturbed that led you to believe that there was any altercation there. The first thought goes to my mind was that it was quick and violent and there wasn't time for any struggle, or she knew the person and just got in a car with him and talked to him.
Lynn Williams came to the house to tell us that he had William Reese as his suspect. I couldn't believe it because I knew who William Reese was. He would come in the restaurant where I worked and he would sit off to himself. He wouldn't join anybody. They didn't know who he was until I went to pick up my ironing at his mom's house. And so she introduced me to him. His mother was Patsy Miley.
Patsy Miley was the same friend who prepared Tiffany's funeral clothes.
And when Tiffany was murdered, Patsy called and took time out of her day to give her condolences for Tiffany's death. And I didn't think anything else about it.
Police have to wonder if Tiffany recognized Reese and let her guard down when he approached her. Kathy also now realizes that the mysterious visitor who left keepsakes once a year at Tiffany's grave might have been Patsy Miley.
Around 2014, the trinkets stopped because that was around the time Patsy died. I think Patsy put the trinkets on Tiffany's grave for her own peace of mind, for her son killing Tiffany, because I really believe that she knew he did it.
After admitting to killing Tiffany, Reese also says he knows exactly what happened to missing women Jessica Kane and Kelly Cox.
Now, with this being a potential death penalty case, William Reese offered to provide the location to where he buried them.
I was out covering news of the day, and I got a call from the assignment editor at my former television station who said that the newsroom received a tip that there was a lot of police activity and a lot of digging going on in this remote field off of I-45 southeast of Houston, known as the Texas Killing Fields. Investigators were digging up the field, and my assignment editor had grown up in southeast Houston, so she remembers these girls when they first went missing. So that was really the first time when we knew there was something big here. Could this be the body of Jessica Kane? Could this be the body of Kelly Cox? Could these be answers that these families have been looking for so many years?
For weeks, The Texas Rangers come up empty, so they turn to the one person who can help them.
William Reese agreed to assist, and arrangements were made for him to be released from the penal institution to accompany the Texas Rangers. William Reese led him to the sites where he buried both bodies. I'm thinking that just adds more ammunition for our case in Oklahoma and getting justice for Tiffany.
With Reese's trial looming, Tiffany's mother has to make a choice.
The district attorney called to tell us that they were filing charges on William Reese and they would like to know what I wanted. And I said, I want the death penalty. I can't forgive Reese for killing Tiffany. The Bible says that an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. And I'm a firm believer in that.
William Reese is sent from Texas to Oklahoma to face murder charges, since prosecutors in Oklahoma are asking for the death penalty. Reese pleads not guilty. After years of delays, his trial begins.
The opening day was definitely the hardest for me just because I was intimidated. William Reese had a connection to our family. He had to have known Tiffany. I was questioning if at any point Reese had ever seen me before. I sat right there in the front row the first day and I couldn't even look at him.
And of course they cleaned him up. He didn't have shaggy hair and he didn't have his shaggy beard. And you look at him and you're going, oh, I'd like to get a hold of you. How can you sit here and plead not guilty when we know you did it?
I've been trying to figure out